Most people know Adrienne Barbeau as the sultry scream queen or sharp-tongued sitcom star, but there's a side of her story that's been quietly hidden for decades. From early rejection to disturbing encounters in Hollywood, the truth behind her rise, fall, and reinvention is far more shocking than anyone expected. Adrienne Barbeau didn't grow up dreaming of fame or red carpets. In fact, she stumbled into show business almost by accident. Born in 1945 in Sacramento, California, she was raised in a quiet working-class environment before her family eventually moved to San Jose. As a student, Adrienne showed no early signs of pursuing entertainment. There were no childhood acting gigs, no pushy stage parents, just a normal upbringing that gave no hint of what was to come. But everything changed when she joined the San Jose Civic Light Opera. She wasn't cast in a Broadway show or a glamorous Hollywood project. Instead, she found herself performing for U.S. troops in Southeast Asia, traveling through military bases and singing for soldiers in the thick of the Vietnam War era. That's where Adrienne first discovered the magnetic energy of an audience. It wasn't film or fame that drew her in, it was the raw connection with people who desperately needed a moment of joy. And those weren't your average theater-goers. These were battle-weary men clinging to a sliver of normal life. That bizarre, unexpected entry into the world of performance shaped Adrienne's early years. She wasn't chasing stardom, she was chasing purpose, even if she didn't realize it yet. The idea that she'd one day become a horror movie icon or a household name was laughable at the time. But her voice, her presence, and her willingness to take risks were already setting her apart. And her next leap would put her right in the path of Broadway greatness. Adrienne Barbeau's next chapter came with a heavy dose of irony. She was catapulted into the spotlight through Broadway, not film, not television, and definitely not horror. In 1965, she made her professional debut on stage, and it didn't take long for her talent to grab attention. One of her earliest standout roles was in Fiddler on the Roof, where she held her own alongside a seasoned cast. But the performance that really made people take notice came in Grease, where she originated the role of Rizzo in the Broadway production. That's right, before Stockard Channing made the role iconic in the film, Adrienne was Rizzo. Sharp, sarcastic, rebellious, she brought the character to life in a way that made audiences cheer and critics take notes. And yet, when Hollywood came knocking to turn Grease into a movie, Adrienne was nowhere to be found. The role she helped shape slipped right through her fingers. For most actors, that kind of rejection would sting for decades. Adrienne, she kept moving. Her performance in Grease and Fiddler caught the eye of TV pioneer Norman Lear, who offered her a spot on a new show called Maude, starring Bea Arthur. It was a big opportunity, but one that came with serious risk. Back in the 70s, actors who moved from stage to television were often viewed as taking a step down. Film directors didn't take TV actors seriously. Adrienne accepted anyway, not knowing that this step down would soon turn her into a national sensation and a cultural flashpoint. Landing a role on Maude should have been a dream come true, but for Adrienne Barbeau, it came with baggage. At the time, there was a clear hierarchy in Hollywood. Movie stars were the royalty, and TV actors were often seen as second tier. Adrienne was stepping into the living rooms of millions as Carol Traynor, the outspoken, feminist daughter of Bea Arthur's Maude. The character was sharp, confident, and unafraid to challenge norms, traits that mirrored Adrienne herself. But while the role gave her instant visibility, it also risked locking her into a certain typecast. The fear was simple but very real. If audiences saw her for free every week, why would they pay to see her on the big screen? Studio executives at the time believed the line between TV and film had to stay thick and uncrossed. For a rising actress, getting pegged as a TV girl could mean missing out on movie roles for years. Adrienne was aware of that risk, but she needed the work, and she believed in the show's message. And Maude wasn't just popular, it was bold. The show tackled race, women's rights, mental health, and abortion at a time when other sitcoms played it safe. Adrienne's character became a lightning rod for the cultural shifts happening across America. But off-camera, she was quietly wondering if she'd made a huge mistake. While Maude was thriving, her big-screen aspirations were put on pause. And it would take something totally unexpected, a genre she didn't even like, to turn her film career around. It's one of Hollywood's greatest ironies. Adrienne Barbeau built a legendary horror career in a genre she couldn't stand. She openly admitted she hated horror movies, couldn't watch them, didn't enjoy the gore. But when her marriage to rising director John Carpenter began, her connection to the genre was sealed. Carpenter cast her in The Fog, a now iconic supernatural thriller that Adrienne reluctantly agreed to star in. At the time, she didn't care for the content, but she wasn't about to turn down the chance to work alongside her husband. The film became a cult classic and launched her as a horror queen almost overnight. Suddenly, the woman who didn't even like horror was being offered every scream-heavy role in sight. Swamp Thing, Escape from New York, Creepshow. Her name became synonymous with the dark and the bizarre. And while fans celebrated her performances, Adrienne felt like she was slipping into a box she never asked for. The blood, the screaming, the damsel roles, it wasn't her passion. But the offers kept coming, and the bills didn't pay themselves. Her role in Creepshow was especially difficult. She was disturbed by the script, uncomfortable with the scenes, and emotionally drained by the experience. But financially, she didn't have the luxury to say no. Turning down work meant fading into obscurity. And despite the discomfort, Adrienne pushed through. Ironically, the genre she couldn't stand was the one that kept her relevant. But what fans didn't know was that behind the makeup and movie screams, she was growing more and more disillusioned. While Adrienne Barbeau made her mark as a confident, tough-talking woman on screen, her real-life experience behind the scenes was far more unsettling. Like many actresses in the male-dominated world of 1960s and 70s Hollywood, Adrienne faced the dark side of the industry early on. In interviews, she's acknowledged that while she was lucky to avoid the worst of it, harassment was still a regular part of the job. And in one particularly disturbing case, the danger came from someone completely outside the world of film. It happened during what should have been a routine job interview with legendary cartoonist Al Cap, the man behind Lil Abner. Adrienne thought she was meeting to discuss a potential role or opportunity. Instead, she found herself on the receiving end of an unsettling proposition. According to her, Cap told her flat out that the only way she'd be hired was if she agreed to please him whenever he demanded. Stunned and disgusted, Adrienne stood up, ended the meeting on the spot, and walked away. In an era when many women felt powerless to speak up, her response was bold and dangerous to her career. Unfortunately, that moment wasn't an isolated one. Adrienne later revealed that while working in the industry, she was constantly aware of the imbalance of power. Women were often treated as disposable, and roles were offered with strings attached. While she was never the target of the worst predators, she saw it happen around her. And that silent burden weighed heavily behind her rising fame. By the mid-1980s, Adrienne Barbeau's star power had started to dim. The iconic roles were fewer, and the big-budget films weren't calling like they used to. Though she still had a recognizable name, the industry had quietly moved on, and for a while, it seemed like Adrienne might simply fade into the background. Offers kept coming in, but they were often low-budget horror projects or roles that barely scratched the surface of her talent. For someone who once lit up Broadway and starred in fan-favorite blockbusters, it was a hard pill to swallow. Behind the scenes, things were even tougher. Money was tight, and she had a son to support. She began accepting roles not out of passion, but necessity. Guest appearances on sitcoms, made-for-TV movies, voiceover gigs, anything that could keep her working. At one point, she even became a book reviewer for cab talk radio, simply to maintain a steady income and stay in the public eye. Most fans had no idea that the woman who once headlined with John Carpenter was quietly fighting to stay afloat. She wasn't seeking the spotlight anymore. She was surviving. And through it all, Adrienne never publicly complained. She stayed professional, adaptable, and determined to keep moving forward. Her love for acting never disappeared, even when the roles got smaller and the credits rolled faster. The industry may have turned its back on her, but Adrienne was far from finished. She just had to find a new way to stay in the game. Just when it seemed like Adrienne Barbeau's time in the spotlight had quietly come to an end, she pulled off something few aging actresses manage, an unexpected second act. Reinvention became her superpower. Instead of chasing the same types of roles she used to get, Adrienne pivoted into something that caught even longtime fans by surprise: voice acting. She brought a whole new generation of fans into the fold when she voiced Catwoman in Batman, the animated series, and Gotham Girls. Her smoky, commanding voice gave the character a darker edge, earning her a cult following among younger audiences who had no idea she'd once been a Broadway star or horror icon. Years later, she voiced the Greek goddess Hera in God of War 3, adding video games to her already diverse resume. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a full-blown reinvention. But she didn't stop there. Adrienne continued making small but memorable appearances in shows like General Hospital, Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and HBO's Carnival, proving that she could still captivate audiences in any format. Her presence was never forced, just quietly effective. The roles weren't flashy, but they were hers, and they kept her working in an industry that often forgets women past a certain age. While many stars from her era faded into obscurity, Adrienne proved that staying relevant doesn't always mean staying in the spotlight. Sometimes it means evolving behind the scenes, adapting, shifting, and re-emerging in completely new ways. And that's exactly what she did. Beneath the confident characters and the cult classic credits, Adrienne Barbeau was living a life that few truly understood. For decades, she maintained the image of a steady, self-assured actress, someone who'd made it, who belonged. But in reality, her journey was far more complicated. In later interviews and memoirs, Adrienne admitted something few fans expected: she never planned on becoming an actress. She hadn't dreamed of stardom or chased fame. In her own words, she simply followed where the wind blew, and that wind wasn't always kind. Her marriage to John Carpenter may have opened doors, but it also trapped her in a genre she disliked. Horror fans adored her, but she felt miscast, misunderstood, and increasingly boxed in. She took roles she didn't believe in because they paid the bills. And while her performances looked confident on screen, off-screen she wrestled with imposter syndrome and long periods of doubt. She also hid the financial instability that followed her after fame began to fade. There were times when money was so tight she had to accept projects she would have once declined without hesitation. She never complained publicly, never asked for pity, but the reality was clear: success had its limits, and survival sometimes came with sacrifice. Despite it all, Adrienne Barbeau built a legacy of quiet resilience. She didn't burn out or disappear, she adapted. Behind the glamour was a woman who endured, evolved, and ultimately outlasted the industry that nearly left her behind. And that, more than any role, may be her greatest achievement. Adrienne Barbeau's journey wasn't built on fame, it was built on survival. From Broadway to horror to voice acting, she constantly adapted, even when Hollywood turned its back. Beneath the spotlight was a woman quietly defying expectations. Her hidden past isn't just surprising, it's a reminder of what true resilience looks like.